Well, today I'm going to share with you kind of a good book. It was a light read in spite of the heavy topic of the occupation of Paris by the Germans in World War II. It is called The Paris Library by Janet Skesley and Charles. I picked it up at a little free library when I was down in Southern California visiting my kids, and it was a good book. It sort of kept me busy during the week at the end of the day, and on the airplane it was just a good read. So the premise of the book is, of course, based on true experience, because this is set in Paris during the occupation, as I said. It's actually two simultaneous stories with the same character in both stories. One of the stories starts in 1939 till about 1944-45, and is the story of a young French woman named Odile who stays in Paris during the war. The other story starts in 1983 in Montana, and it's the story of a young teenager and her coming of age in Montana in the 80s. Now, in this book, Odile, the protagonist in the early part of the book, during the occupation, is a young girl. They're a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old. Somehow in 1983, she appears again in Montana as an older lady, the widow of a rancher there. The library is sort of the focal point of this book and the love of reading. Odile, the young woman, gets a job against her parents' wishes. Her father wants her to stay at home, but she gets a job at the Paris Library. It's an American library, and she starts as a volunteer, then gets a job, and is just all the characters who come to this library either work there or they are subscribers, as they call them. We call them, I guess, members. I don't know. There are a lot of characters here. There are characters who have been through World War I. There's some characters who escaped from Russia. It's kind of a melting pot of cultures and languages, just as Paris was at that point in time. So through the lens of this young woman, we see the occupation start, the occupation get more and more intense, some of the ramifications of the occupation, her own personal life, the friends she makes, the man she meets, what happens to her friends during the occupation and after the occupation, all set with the backdrop of the library. The other part of the book, set in the 80s, follows this young girl called Lily and her coming of age and what happens in her life with a major loss in the family and new people coming in, and just all the things that could happen to a young girl as she goes through puberty and as she goes through her high school years out in that little town way out in Montana. And the second half of the book, the Montana book, and it's not really a half because there's a chapter in Paris and a chapter in Montana, a chapter in Paris, chapter in Montana. Lily, the young woman, and Odile meet and strike up a friendship. Odile's teaching her French. She wants to learn French. They start talking. They kind of guide each other. Now, in these stories, both stories, the story in Paris with the library and the story in Montana with a young girl, there are some, I guess, shocking reveals about what really happens during a war and what is treason, what isn't treason, what is collaboration, what isn't collaboration, what is just shutting one's eyes. There's many moral questions in this book, especially in the first half, and the moral questions spill over to the relationship between this young woman and Odile, the French woman who's already quite old. The book was very readable, as I mentioned before, and very interesting, and I like the fact that it was set with this kind of framework of the library. I thought it was good, and it is based on true characters and true people, even some of the Nazis, people who passed through. If you're looking for something a little grittier and a little more in-depth about the occupation of Paris and of the countryside, then I suggest The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. That is a much heavier duty book. It is denser, very factual, historical fiction following two sisters, one of whom stays in the country, and what happens when you stay in the country trying to maintain the home there while her husband's at war and unheard of. And then the other is the story of this woman's sister who actively joins the resistance, and what happens to her. And it is a pretty horrifying look at what life was like during the occupation of Paris by the Germans. And I suggest that book also because it is so good, but it is heavier, it is denser, it is longer, and it's very emotional. As I said, this book is lighter. It does get into the occupation, and it does get into things that are kind of ugly, but it's just not as intense. But the moral questions remain, and I think that was maybe the point of this book, is the morality of how people behave during a war and after a war, and does anyone really have clean hands? That's kind of the question. But it is a very good read. I highly recommend it. I enjoyed it immensely. As I said, I was reading it every evening. I would really rush to get through it in the evenings just to read it and see what would happen next. I love the characterizations of all the people, this French woman through the years, the young girl in Montana, and all the supporting characters, and what happens to them, when they're young, and then look backwards when they're older. So again, the book is The Paris Library. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you so much for watching.